It's time for Straight Talk Live with renowned radio pioneer Edna Howell-Parrish, the television show and podcast dedicated to presenting thought-provoking issues and opinions with the goal of challenging listeners to re-examine their assumptions and expand their opinions and give thought to new ideas and concepts to better their lives and the lives of others. This is your opportunity to participate in making the world better. So without further ado, let's get ready for Straight Talk Live with your host Edna Howell-Parrish.
Oh, hello, and welcome to the show. I'm Edna Howell-Parrish, and my cousin is joining us today as we kick off this legacy. I call it a historical broadcast because it's part one of the Combs, OLINGER, CORNETT, and all the other surnames of family members that are related to us. Crystal White Combs. Welcome, Crystal.
Hi, cousin. Edna and I, our grandfathers are brothers. And so I am very happy about joining my cousin here on this chat today.
Well, Crystal, I'll call this historical because nobody's ever done this in the Combs, OLINGER, CORNETT, another surname derivatives family. Not what we're going to be doing for the next 4 Sundays in a row. It's historical. So I have asked all of our cousins, people that know us, don't know us, people that think they're related to us, or people that don't know who their families are, to join us in these chats. And for people that are just listening and interested, you can learn from this as to maybe how you might be able to set up a chat for your own family. How important do you think it is for us to keep this legacy going of knowing who our families are?
Thinking about that a lot today, just because of some of the prompts that I think it's really important. Our oral history was so much a part of how we found out who we were or where we came from. And now we have more tools to kind of solidify that family history. And I think it's important that our kids, our legacies, our families know where we came from, what we endured, and who we are right now, because we can rely on some of those lessons to take us through these hard times right now, because a lot of those stories, those family stories, will let us know about resilience. They will let us know about self-reliance, and they will let us know about love. And sometimes they will let us know why not to do some things. And so there's so many different stories within our families. And I think one of the most important things is because you and I can say that we're here because of all of those things that our families and our ancestors did. Your grandfather, Simon, my grandfather, Burnham, our great-grandfather, John, our great-grandmother, Louisa. So I think those things are important, and us sharing those stories with our families are important.
Indeed, I think that people that are listening and probably see some unusual action on the screen, the situation is buffering, and it may cause some delays, but continue to listen and be part of the show because you'll get some information, and other information we'll continue to share with you as well. As we get started, let's talk about this Combs legacy. Where did it all start? Because I know that we go back in history a long time, thanks to your father, cousin Kenneth, who is my cousin. Kenneth is your father's my second cousin, my mother's first cousin. And yes, your father was so interested in the Combs family legacy and OLINGER and CORNETT that he began to do some research a long time ago. And tell us how that started and where he learned to do the research.
Okay, so my dad, and I think you know a little bit about this. My father lost both of his parents before he was 8 years old. And they all lived in Cincinnati. And his grandmother Nan Olinger Cornett brought him and his three brothers. She was a widow at the time, which always, when we talk about these stories and why it's important, my great grandmother Nan was a widow. She was a widow with 9 children. One was almost a little bit older than my father's oldest brother. And so she went and got these 3 children and brought them to Hazard, to Town Mountain, Browns Fork, to live with her. And my father grew up with such a love of family because his family in Browns Fork and Kentucky and Hazard really informed him of who he was. And so when I think about the connection that you and I have, which is our grandfathers or brothers, Uncle Simon played a very important role in my dad's life. So let's talk about the Combs family legacy. So our last name Combs comes from the enslavers who went from North Carolina to Kentucky. And one of the ways that we discovered this was prior to Ancestry and 23andMe, people had to go to libraries to do research. And that was one of the things that my dad did. And so since his passing back in 2017, I have boxes and boxes and boxes of all his paper research, not research that was done on the computer, not research that was done through DNA, things that were done through census records, birth certificates, deeds, newspaper articles, things that left a paper trail. So he looked for things based on those oral stories because, oral history is so much a part of who we are. And as people that are from Appalachia, we are prolific storytellers. That's why my cousin Edna is doing a podcast, because we are prolific storytellers. People from that region, we talk a lot and we can tell a good story and we can put all of it together. So my dad took all of these different elements through research and paper and created a history. And he was really into that. He was an engineer by trade, but he really was a family historian. And I think that my connection to my grandparents is almost as strong as if they were living, because I know so much about them through things that he saved and documented, things that ended up being important. So the Combs brothers that came from North Carolina, they were loggers. And a lot of our ancestors ended up being loggers. And you can look at the death certificates and see how that was just hard work. They a lot of heart disease in our family. We worked hard. And so they were loggers. They came to southeastern Kentucky. And so that's why you and I, both are related to 2 different branches of Combs because of these brothers that owned slaves and gave them their last name. Enslaved people. I'm trying not to use that word slaves. Enslaved people, and they were in Hazard, southeastern Kentucky, Knott County, Letcher County. They were all kind of in that region. And that's how we have that surname Combs and Hogg, and a lot of those other connections were based because these families migrated from North Carolina to Kentucky.
Well, speaking of tellers, my cousin Crystal Combs is a storyteller herself, and also a keeper of the family legacy, because, as you say, you inherited a lot of your, in fact, the mainstay of all your father's hard work and searching for DNA and family history photos. You and your have done a fantastic job, and often I see all the stories that you post on Facebook about our grandmothers and great grandfathers, and so we're going to share some of that with our listeners. But I want to let people know that if you're listening today, you have an interest in what we're talking about, our chat line is open, and you're welcome to enter the chat line a question to Crystal. If you think you're related, if you want to register for the future shows, because we have 3 more shows to do, we're going to have other Combs members on. We can have up to 10 people on the line at a time. And so you'll be able to join us on the show. Crystal can come back. Her brother, Kenneth, can come back. He's invited to come. And some our other cousins that have said that they want to be in the chat too. So I wanted to get that. Let's you chat with us today. questions and concerns. Now, before we move on, I'm going to show a picture of our grandfathers so people can get a chance to see who they are and what they
Simon Combs, and on the right is my grandfather, Barnham Walter Combs, and that was Simon's younger brother. And I believe at the time Uncle Simon was a sheriff. And I think that people say to me,
right.
yep, they say, well, you know so much about your family history, but you know what? Look at that photo. Look at all the details that all of us can, if we look a little bit deeper, we can glean from that photo. Those were two very well dressed people for the early 1900s. I think their braveness is showing in that photo. And I think, without me identifying the fact that, they were there to represent themselves. They were there to keep order. And, there's just a lot that you can glean from looking at that photo. Just a little side note.
I want to bring that photo back up, Chris.
Yep, they were very, very dapper. Those aren't big pistols, but I don't know. I don't I don't know what the laws were about us owning guns at the time, but they were there. They were not to be played with. They were very, they were just they were letting you know. They were letting you know. And they were both very hardworking men. And one of the things that I learned from my father, because he spent summers with our grandfather's mother, so who would be our great grandmother, Grandma Louisa. So she was from West Africa. And one of the things that is a characteristic of the part of the tribe that she would have been associated with was that they were very much about order. And so when you think about how many of our cousins, how many of our relations are into public service and order, that's in our DNA. That's in our DNA. And we can trace that all the way back to where our great grandmother came from. Am I right, Cousin Edna? There's a lot of us in public service.
Think about those. You are right, especially police officers in our family, because I got some cousins that were Jimmy Combs in Dayton, Ohio, David Fox in Dayton, Ohio. I could keep on just thinking about, then we have uncles in military service. In fact, Uncle Lionel Combs, a police officer from Dayton, Ohio. I mean, they kind of took after their grandfather. I mean, yeah, they did after Lionel Combs' father, Simon Combs, Simon the sheriff.
Yes.
Lionel Combs,
yes,
the police officer. Then the nephews, David and Jimmy, and then Jimmy's sister Celestine was in as a sheriff. She was in military service at Wright Patton. We went on to some other cities to be in police service. So I mean, it runs deep in the family. It does.
Deep. That public service and creativity. And I'm telling you, I can tell a Combs by those two things, because they are going to have a creative outlet and they are going to serve. And we are good storytellers, because our great grandmother Liza, my father would sit at her feet and she would tell him these stories. And so the opportunity that you and I have been given because of our great grandmother to keep telling her story, it's a blessing. It's a blessing indeed. But that public service gene is so strong. It is.
One more I'll tell you about our cousin Byron Fox, who has also worked for the FBI. Yeah, that's public service, and that's also that police mentality too. Their sister Marva, she's a member of she's a pastor. Their brother David is a pastor. And then we have in our others were teachers. Uncle John's kids, they were all, Uncle John was a teacher. Their children, I mean, you start naming them, and then, the work that your dad did, this is amazing. Let me show who our grandmother is. You talk about Louisa Compton. I know you have a story about her as well.
Mm-hmm. And us just being able to see their faces, which I just love that I'm able to see their faces. And you have high cheekbones, I have high cheekbones, and our great grandmother had high cheekbones. Okay, so maybe we have that from her. We don't know, but maybe we do. But great grandmother Louisa Frances.
So talk about Louisa. Talk about her. Talk about our great grandmother. Great grandmother. Talk about her.
So from what my dad said, she was a very reserved, quiet woman. And he always said that he wished he would have answered. He asked her more questions about things, but she was very reserved, very stoic was the word that he would always use. So we believe that her origin, where she came in through in the United States, may have been Maryland. And they ended up in southeastern Kentucky in Letcher County. She had sisters. We do know that. I named my daughter after one of her sisters. And I named my daughter, I'll just take a side trip. I named my daughter after one of her sisters. This sister told on someone that had harmed her. And her tongue was taken out of her mouth because of that. So she was told not to talk, so she wouldn't talk again. And I think it's profound that my daughter, who I named after her, is a prolific storyteller. So she works for a major news network. And so she's telling a whole lot of stories. My daughter is. So, in Africa, they say that, you name someone because of a certain trait. And Lauren tells those stories all over the world. But anyways, getting back to our grandmother was from the west coastal region of Africa, where they were traders. And what I mean that they made goods to sell and trade. So again, I would go back to this Combs DNA. We are very creative with art and making things and creating things. That is very much strong in our DNA. So our great grandmother, it is believed, just based on some of these traditions, some of these practices that she carried out, that my father was able to talk to people that were historians, curators, just to tell the story of things that she did. So she and our grandfather John, they were farmers. They lived in Knott County. He was a logger. He was an undertaker. But, of course, she was in total command of her home. And in doing that, she made the blankets. She preserved food. My father said that when you visited her house, there were herbs growing and she was always drying something out. But she has given us what I think is one of our deepest connections to who we are. For each one of her children, she made a blanket. And I call it a blanket because it is made in the African aesthetic of a blanket, as opposed to a quilt. Pieces of things that are scraps that were quilted together. Our great grandmother was in total command of this creation. And so if you think about someone that was a slave, they weren't necessarily in total control over what they made. They were given scraps. They quilted things kind of in the European aesthetic. They may have used quilts and colors. They may have selected them on our own. But our great grandmother was in total command of everything that she artistically created. And this quilt that was given to my grandfather Burnham, and to each one of her children, she made a quilt. This quilt was made completely in the Mandi aesthetic. So she raised the sheep, she dyed the wool, she spun it, and she created these blankets, which are just beautiful in the African, in this Mandi aesthetic. And, I'm trying to lean away from associating it with a certain country, because In Africa, it's more of a tribal association than a country. And so she was from West Africa, she was from Guinea, but the quilts, the colors, the pattern are definitely in that tribal aesthetic. And it's such a great gift. But when I think about the message behind it, and if you, I'm sorry, I should have showed a picture of the quilt, but if you look at the quilt, it has an uneven pattern. And that was one of the things that helped the curators. This blanket has traveled all over the country. It was displayed at the Smithsonian Institute. When it was displayed, it was first displayed back in 1976. My father, my mother, and my brother and I had a wonderful outing at the Cleveland Museum of Art. Alex Haley was there. He, talking about family history because roots was the big thing. But it was really great to see my great grandmother's quilt hanging in the Smithsonian Institute. And if you think about her coming from Knott County, Kentucky, raising the sheep, dyeing the wool from things that she grew with her own hands, and being able to touch that, it's almost like reaching back in history, reaching back to where she was from, thinking about how her mother and her mother's mother probably taught her how to do that, and looking at the tiny little threads and how long it would have taken to do it. And the fact that 100 years later, we still have that piece of her, the piece that reminds us of where she was from, what she was taught, and what she endured. I'll tell you, I believe that if anybody talked to us, we could find that resilience in their family history. And I think that a lot of us, as descendants of enslaved people, think there's so much shame in these stories. But when you think about this creativity and what she did to protect her children by making a blanket, and how she grew everything, it was from her land down there in Knott County, which they left to all of us. We still have that, and she grew that. She grew it. She raised the sheep. She sheared them. She spun the wool. She dyed it. I mean, when I just think about what all she did to do that, I'm so grateful that I can see it, touch it, feel it, and reach back and think about all that she left to us. So I think that she left an important message for us. And I'm proud that we all get to share that story. And maybe on bad days that can help us. you know.
Indeed. My cousin Crystal White Combs is the storyteller. She's our guest today. I'm going to show you from the book, The Afro-American Traditions and Decorative Arts, Our Grandmother's Quilt. Now I know you have the color picture. In the book, it's in black and white, but I remember the orange and the red. I've never seen it in person, but I know you have that. So I'm going to show this to you from the book itself, so people will be able to see this is from the book, African Traditions. Here it is. Okay, and so this is the quilt. And so talk about the quilt and the patch in it and everything, Crystal.
So what I love about this is, okay, you can see if you see the quilt in person, it's red, it's yellow. There are thin strips of another color. So these were all from vegetable dyes. And so this means that, this is Kentucky and West Africa all together. And that's who we are as a family, because we are as much Kentuckians as we are from West Africa. And I think every Combs that you'll know will say they're from Kentucky. Okay. Every Combs that you know, but we are also West African. So what I will tell you about that quilt is you see two strips. Yeah. And so each side would be the size of the loom that she made with her own hands. She made that loom. And so wood crafts are very much a part of our family. I have a table that our Uncle Cassie made, and he carved it all by hand. And he gave the table to my dad, and I still have the table here in my house. So wood crafts, her creating the loom was something that had been passed down to her. So that's what that's a part of that story of that quilt. Looking at, I think that if I wanted to take a deeper dive, or some of our younger cousins could take a deeper dive, and let's figure out what she used to dye and make those colors. Those colors that she selected are definitely in that West African tradition of hot and cool, and that represents something. And they believe that evil traveled in a straight line, and that's why you don't see the stripes lined up on the quilt. So that was another thing. And then the patch was, she used another one of the quilts. She made one of those quilts for each one of her kids, and the patch is from one of the other quilts. So you can see some of the other colors that she selected in that. And the quilt, so when my grandfather passed away, she gave a quilt to each one of his children. And so my father kept his. I don't know how he kept that thing, because of course he moved from Browns Fork, went to Kentucky State, then moved to Cleveland, and then moved 2 or 3 times in Cleveland. And that quilt is here with me in Michigan, and I'm just trying to find the right place for it, because we know we do have some unsteadiness right now with our national museums. So I just want to make sure it's in the right place. I'm sorry.
Can you repeat that, please? Can you repeat that? You said unsteadiness.
I think that to turn it over to a national museum right now might create some unsteadiness or some worry for me, so I'm just trying to find the right place for it, so that it can be preserved, for generations to come, because I think it's an important part of, I think that so much when we see art that was created by enslaved women, we see things where some of the creation of was dictated to them, how they made it, but hers was totally her own creation from start to finish. Everything in it was done by her own hands. And there are only actually less than 200, I think the number was somewhere around 100 quilts that remain in this country that were created by women that have been enslaved. So that's why it's so significant.
Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Let's keep pushing our legacy forward, so we can build each other up and leave that legacy for our children to come. Because once I'm gone, I only have one son, but I'm trying to get him to be interested. I don't know, you have children. I know they probably are really interested. We have cousins, maybe they are. Join us in the chat this afternoon. You have 3 more chances to be part of this program that we're having today, as we talk about the family and the legacy of Combs Olinger. All the people that are part of CORNETT and Olinger as well. This is my grandmother and grandfather. This is on my mother's side of the family. You call her Aunt Jane, but I call her Mama. So
I love that picture.
Yeah, they was chilling out, weren't they, on the lawn somewhere, some mountainside. I am sure, from where they were from in Hazard, Kentucky. So that's amazing. I love to see that one as well. Mama Janie, I tell you. Now, we also have a picture of Charity Olinger and William Olinger. When we come back, to push you down, I want you to talk about that when we come back. Now, who are these good-looking people?
I believe that's George Olinger. Is that George Olinger?
It says Charity Olinger and William Olinger. Now, these pictures and names sometimes get confused, but I know who they definitely look like my cousins, the Fox family. This is on my grandmother's side, right?
That sure looks like
Then
Byron
on
Fox on that picture. That looks like Byron Fox on that.
You know it, girl. And then Charity is dead on. Aunt Edith and her children. That's who they are. Aunt Edith's children, the Foxes. My mother's sister. It looks just like them, don't they?
I know, and you know, with our family, my uncle. So Aunt Jane and my grandmother Nan were first cousins. So,
oh, is that where the OLINGER comes in?
Yes, Aunt Jane and my grandmother were first cousins.
Okay, I see. I have a picture of Nan. Is that Nancy? No, that's not her, is it? No. Wow, that's amazing. Wow.
So we're doubly related, which I want to say this, like if you do ancestry, I know people have whatever reasons they don't want to do ancestry, but if you are a Combs, Cornett, OLINGER, when we do ancestry, our relation ends up looking stronger because we are Cornett and we are Combses, and that's linked in there. So somebody that would probably be like my third cousin might show up as a second cousin strictly because there's Cornett, OLINGER DNA in there mixed with Combs. And so, we don't want to confuse anybody thinking people from the hills married, whatever, but we show up a little bit stronger because you and I, Aunt Jane is my cousin, and she married my uncle. So she and my grandmother Nan were first cousins.
Okay.
Yep.
See, that's not surprising because my mom's Uncle Cassie, who is her father's brother, married my father's great aunt, who is his mother's, aunt. And so I'm double related on both sides, my mother and my father's side. My mother and father are not related, I don't think. But a lot of people were surprised that Uncle Cassie and my Aunt Martha married. I mean, that's his second marriage, and not the woman that he had his children by, but we're cousins.
But cousins. And you know what? Aunt Martha, she was an artist. I remember she used to have these dolls in the house, and she would make all these pretty little dresses and stuff for them. And I knew not to touch them, but I wanted to. And they were both artists.
Yes.
They were both artists. So
I want to cut your head off, girl. To break you down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's another picture I have here that I want to see if you know.
Jackson Combs.
How are they related?
Jackson Combs and was on the right. Is that William?
Yes.
You gotta help me out. Is that William? Yes. Okay. William, is it William?
William Combs and Jackson Combs.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So Jackson is my let me see, great grandfather. And he is the son of Jackson has a pretty strong legacy in Kentucky because he was the son of his enslaver, Robert Combs, and Harriet Horton was his mother. And so Jackson's daughter, Louisa, is my grandmother. And I mean, not grandmother, Liza Combs is my grandmother. But Jackson Combs was quite a character. And he is a lot of people that we know, a lot of prominent Eastern Kentuckians are descendants of this man. He was a landowner. He was a bootlegger. And he gave land so the church could be built. Most of his descendants, a lot of his descendants, are buried on a cemetery that was in his land. But he was quite the character. My father said he did not, for the end of his life, he would not lay down because he wanted to die standing up. So one of my favorite pictures of him is him standing on the edge of this porch because he wouldn't sit down. But everything that I have read and everything that I know about him said he was a pretty
yes.
yes. And so his son, Britt, one of the first African American doctors in the state of Kentucky, Britt Combs. You'll see Britt Combs's name on a lot of our family's birth and death certificates. Uncle Britt. Uncle Britt was educated at Berea, Kentucky, and a lot of people, a lot of white people in Kentucky decided that the African American population needed to have a doctor. Prior to that, people were going to dentists, anything to get treated for whatever. We did not have anybody to treat us. So Uncle Britt went to Berea College. He finished at Meharry, and he was one of the first doctors in Kentucky. And he has a colorful history as well. So the father and son, very much a part of Hazard, Kentucky, and then one of his other descendants, they call him Uncle Brown, started one of the first fully accredited schools for African Americans in the state of Tennessee. The state of Tennessee did a movie about his Jackson's grandson, and so he has a lot of prominent descendants. And the reason why I think his story is worth telling is because here is someone that was the son of an enslaver and a slave, and a woman that maybe willingly or not willingly gave birth to this child. He ended up doing so much that we still benefit from. And what I don't know about him, I feel like I really know him just through the stories that my father told me.
A picture of Dr. Britt Combs. Now, while I show the picture, they can't hear you talking, so just wait till I come back. Now, that's Dr. Britt Combs on horseback. First Black physician in Hazard, Kentucky. Grandson of their enslaver, is that correct? He becomes a
grandson. Yep, grandson of the enslaver, son of Jackson Combs. So that was Jackson Combs was his father. And you can Uncle Britt's name is on so many different birth certificates, death certificates. He was there for our family through a lot of different things. And he has a colorful history, I will say that. But I think that the fact that he went to Meharry and came back to Hazard, I think that says a lot about who he probably was. I think that you see the world, you go to Meharry. I think he was in Louisville for a certain amount of time, but he came back to Hazard to practice medicine. And his name is on so many of our passages of our family members, and you have to think about what kind of toll that probably took on him. But he treated a lot of our family. He came back after he was educated. People thought enough about him to fund his education at Berea College and Meharry. So a lot of life lessons in Uncle Britt's life.
Wow, amazing. We're going to take a break, Crystal. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the family legacies, about property, about wills, money. Don't hide it under your mattress. We're going to talk about that. Some people did, some people still do today. But I want to play a piece here about measles because, as you know, around the country, measles has an outbreak going on in Texas right now. And a lot of people are asking questions, should I get inoculated? Because you know how diseases spread so fast. You know how COVID spread. So I don't know if measles are coming this way or what, but I want people not to be caught unaware. So we'll play
Recently, there's been a lot of talk about measles. What does measles actually do, and should you vaccinate against it, or is this just hysteria? Measles is a virus, a hull of proteins, RNA, plus some more proteins for reproduction. It cannot reproduce by itself, it needs a host cell to do so. To understand measles, we have to understand the immune system. You might already have seen the visual system we developed to help here. Now, let's focus on the parts of the immune system relevant to measles. The measles virus enters humans through the nose, mouth, or eyes. The measles infection starts in the lungs. Measles is especially good at infecting the body's first line of defense, macrophages, powerful guard cells that protect the lungs from intruders. They enter a cell and take it over. The virus reprograms the cell and transforms it into a dangerous virus production center. Once a cell is filled with viruses, they leave the crippled cell and begin the cycle over again. But the immune system has powerful weapons against virus infections, natural killer cells. These cells basically patrol the body and check other cells for infections. If they find an infected cell, they order it to commit suicide. This is so effective that for the first 10 days or so, you will not even notice that you're infected with measles. And now, the reason why measles is so powerful. After a period of fighting and dying, macrophages alert the brain of the immune system, the dendritic cells. The job of the dendritic cells is to collect samples of intruders, travel to the lymph nodes, and then activate the heavy weapons that eradicate the infection very fast in a team effort. But the measles virus uses a dreadful tactic. It infects the dendritic cells and uses them as a Trojan horse to enter deeper into the body. The infected cells travel to the next lymph node to alert other immune cells. Once it arrives, the measles virus spreads around the virgin T and B cells and infects them. It attacks the very system that evolved to fight it. Now, things happen very fast. The lymph system spreads the virus everywhere and it enters the bloodstream, infecting cells while traveling. Measles infects organs like the spleen, the liver, the intestines, and most importantly, the lungs. The symptoms range from a very high fever, headache, sickness, bronchitis, and of course, a rash. In the lungs, the immune system was doing pretty okay, but now millions of viruses attack a second time and kill countless cells, wiping out the defense systems. In this phase, you start coughing out millions of measles viruses. Measles is so contagious at this stage that if you meet someone who isn't vaccinated, there's about a 90% chance you'll infect them. Without the protective army in the lungs, other bacteria or viruses that would usually not stand a chance can now enter the lungs and develop into harmful parallel infections that can cause pneumonia, the most common way to die from measles. Your body's immune system is now seriously wounded. Various protective systems are hurt and disrupted. The virus spreads everywhere, infecting the skin all over the body. The typical measles rash now becomes visible. And in some cases, the measles virus reaches the brain and causes a brain infection. If it does so, the chances of dying are between 20 to 40%, and there may be long-term damage. But your body is far from giving up at this stage, and it fights back aggressively. Some dendritic cells survive long enough to activate the antivirus forces of the body. Plasma cells in the lymph nodes start producing billions of antibodies, tiny proteins that mark infected cells for destruction or clump the virus together. Killer T cells flood the body and kill infected cells left and right. After 2 to 3 weeks, the body usually gets the upper hand and overwhelms the infection. But the immune system is now seriously weakened and may take weeks or months to recover, leaving the body vulnerable to other diseases. But if you make it, you are now immune. The immune system remembers the virus forever. Measles is no joke. Although 84% of all humans are vaccinated against measles, 122,000 people died because of the infection in 2014. Some people cannot get vaccinations. either because they're too young, because of chemotherapy or HIV, or because they're allergic to the vaccine. They need the rest of us to stop the disease for them. The measles vaccination is safe, cheap, and available. There are no benefits from having measles at all. You don't strengthen your immune system, and it's not more natural. Most people who don't vaccinate only want the best for their children, which is honorable. But if you ask yourself, am I putting the life of my child and other children at risk by not vaccinating against measles? The sad answer is yes. Yes, you are. Let's not play the blame game though. Let's work together and eradicate this virus. Together, we can get rid of these dreadful monsters and consign them to their rightful place, the history books.
Well, measles, they say, is the fastest growing disease out there now. They say that it is one of the most contagious diseases on earth, more contagious than Ebola, more contagious than smallpox, and just about any other infectious disease, even COVID. So should you get vaccinated? I'm not saying you should. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but take it under advisement for your own self and your protection. Now, our children have to be vaccinated before they can enter school. Definitely kindergarten, public school. That's what the state laws say. In fact, it was a government law. I don't know what our new health secretary Kennedy's going to say about this. He doesn't believe in a lot of vaccinations. So I'm not sure, Crystal, but I'm just telling people to take it on their own advisement. Back in the day, I told you that when we got measles or chickenpox or mumps, my mother would say to her sisters, the girls got chickenpox or they got this. Because, they say, cousins, come on, bring them over so they can all get it. And they'd be over with it. They get treated all together. All of us cousins would get treated. Now, I'm not saying that was the right thing to do, but that's what they did. And then I guess a little bit later on is when the public health departments started saying that children had to be vaccinated before they could come into school. That's what those parents did back in the day. So I don't know. This is serious stuff.
We had a lot of natural immunity to things, but these viruses have evolved into different type of strains and whatnot. So, our parents took different type of precautions. I don't know. And that goes back to, when you talk about looking at the family history, that's one of the things that if you go beyond the DNA and look at death certificates or birth certificates and look at where people were during certain epidemics. My grandmother died of tuberculosis and she died in a sanitarium in Cincinnati. And so she was separated from her children at the time, but that was really devastating families, that epidemic, at the time. So, I know what these precautions can mean to your family. So, it's time we all take a pause for the cause and think about what our course of action will be as families, in responding to these type of concerns. So I think that you brought up a very important topic for all of us.
Well, that's a public service in me. That was what my career has always been, in news and public service information. I know that you are a university level information person, so we both have that in our DNA as well.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about pushing forward, building each other up. I want to talk about people stealing other people's property. The bad guys, they notice that property is empty, a lot of times vacant, and they assume that nobody wants it. And so they'll go to their circuit court's office and file a quit claim deed and force the owner's signature. This is happening so much. I know during the election time, the young lady who was running for our county recorder in Montgomery County on my show, and we talked about this happening in our area and nationwide, and it's not uncommon. People whose legacies and who have property in their families need to be careful as well. I know you've dealt, and your father has dealt with property because our family owns some big property. Can you tell us about that?
Well, up until my father passed from this earth, he subscribed to a couple of newspapers, the paper copies of newspapers in southeastern Kentucky, because land sales would be on those published in those newspapers. So again, I think that part of ensuring your family's legacy, if our ancestors, all of these people that we're talking about, Pap and great grandfather John and Uncle Simon and all these people we're talking about, all this hard work and sacrifice they did, I know that keeping that land in our inheritance and honoring that family legacy is important to us. So one of the things that we can do is know our family history. Make sure that we have those documents and that we can say who we are. So in case if there's not a proper will, that you can file an affidavit of survivorship and say you are this person, you're their descendant, that you can go down to the right office, look up that file and make sure that everything leads to you being a survivor of that descendant, and you can make your rightful claim to that property. Having a will, of course, is the top tier of being able to rightfully claim what's yours. But in lieu of that, knowing that you are the survivor, having the right documentation in order to properly claim that is a part of that. One of the things that my dad used to do was take us down there. We went to get, I'm sure every Combs, that's listening to this, every Combs, CORNETT, OLINGER, we can all say that we took an annual trip down there. But I think that my father would take me to the county office where the taxes would be paid, make sure that I knew where that was, drive me past the property, show me that. Be able to eyeball it if necessary. And you know what? You have Google Maps now. You can put that in there and make sure you can eyeball it. You can look at it, see it, so know what's happening down there, but make a connection to that place where our property is. I think that it's so important. Looking back now, because my dad is not here, my parents are not here, it's more important than any other time that I make sure my granddaughter, I have one grandchild right now. I'm hoping for more with my son, but I have one grandchild. Letting them physically know what it looks like, where it is. So it's not just this thing that we talk about. I know so many of us say that we'll never sell it. We don't know what future generations might do. So it's important to tell the stories of our family. And that's why these chats that you're having are so important. And we're so indebted to you for amplifying these stories so that we can talk about our we can talk about the things that we need to do to preserve the sacrifices of our ancestors. Because what they did in acquiring property was important to them at the time. It was important to them.
I think back when I can remember when I was young, and my mother, one of the things I learned, young up, she said, our family owns property. And, my great grandfather or grandfather, they had all this property. And so I have a child's part, and so-and-so has a child's part. And so you talked about those people being in order, because the way they divided this land up, I'm going to ask you several questions about, number one, where did poor people back in that day get 95 acres of land? And they divided it up so equally that today, we know about my mom's part, and, it's inherited. We inherited, different ones have inherited this property. How did they come up with this land, and how did they do it so much in order that it still stays today, the legacy of the Combs family and this property?
And you brought up something that's so, I mean, it's really it's a miracle. And when you look at what had to happen behind it, I know with Pat, he part of that land was given to him. But if you think about what went into a Black person owning property at the end of the last century, or even going back to the 1800s, I think one of the deeds that I have is from the 1898. It's almost like, so that community service piece, you're doing a service to the family and talking about how did they get that land. Some of it was by working, some of it was they actually purchased, some of it was given to them. Sometimes an enslaver acknowledged the paternity and gave it to that person, to that heir. I have seen on Ancestry, some people have made reparations and given property to people that worked for their families. That is actually taking place on Ancestry. So I think that you brought up something that's really important, knowing the history about how that property was acquired. I know that partially with Pat, it was through that his father, gave him part of that property, and I know Pat bought it. I see the deeds. I see how much he paid for it, and how much he had. And I think that we can all document. That is one of the reasons, whether you do DNA or not on these sites, being able to look up the historical documents that prove your ownership, getting a copy of them and having them is important. So, if we had to go to court, we have copies of these, we have the paper trail. This is where it was bought. This is what it is. My dad preserved those documents where we can say, this is who it was witnessed by. This is who it has. We need to, that's why the family website that you have is so important. Telling these stories in the African tradition of the oral history, but also solidifying them with something written and the documentation we need to move forward. So, Edna, I love you. I think it's so important what you're doing right now
it's so important
to preserving our family history. And so to make it so that the younger people in our family can tell the story just like we do. My father would just sit and repeat the story over and over again. And in the last 2 weeks of his life, one of the things that he said to me that I think about so much on my worst days was when he said, family, that was all we had. And so I think that I want to say thank you to you for helping me to let me tell this story, because it really helps me with my grief, but it also helps me honor a lot of the things that my dad did. So I just want to say publicly thank you to you. I appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. We have a few more minutes because I want to, we took some time to share the measles story, but I want to talk about some of the other things too, because a lot of people, they think, oh, it's not that important. But I can remember when my mother, when they began to sell the mineral rights to the land, mineral rights are really important. Donald Trump told us about that, when they want to get those mineral rights over there in Russia wants the mineral rights and America wants them in what the country where he had to fight with the Russian president and the other guy Friday. Mineral rights are really important. They sold trees, they sold the coal. And when my mother would get those little checks every time they would sell something, that was really important. So now they say, well, everything is gone off of there. All the trees and coal and everything is gone from the mountain. But it's still, we don't know what those minerals are still in that ground. So we don't know. So you got to keep up with your property and you have to know it. And when you pass it on to your children, make sure somebody knows in the family, because you never can tell when people are trying to steal from you. And with the president announcing he's going to be selling gold cards for people that live out of the country, foreigners coming in, if you got $5 million, you can buy a gold card and become an American citizen and bring your company and your business over here. They're trying to give it away. So who knows, they might try to come down there and take somebody's property from anywhere, because they're trying to build up the nation with other people, rich people. I think I know that. So you think, well, maybe she's a spreading conspiracy, but I think that's a fact.
No, and the fact that those mineral rights can expire And so it's important for us to know that, they might be going down there just taking the minerals and taking whatever they think they need, and it's actually expired. So to have a copy of the deed that says when the mineral rights expire. Also, some of this mining and land erosion is contributing to flooding in Kentucky. So we really need to be on top of when that expired. My father took somebody to court over the mineral rights on our property. I know he did that a couple of times. And that's something that I really need to, I had my dad, to depend on. He talked to me about it. That's why listening to these stories, because, I'm getting older. Somebody needs to know this. I have even thought about with the deeds that I have to make sure my children's names are on it, so there will be no delay in transferring a property. So it's the heirs of Crystal Combs White, or it's the heirs, but knowing all of those details about the property is important, and having a document repository for your family where you're having the birth certificates, where you're having the documents that will help you tell the story of the mineral rights, the land ownership, and who is entitled to make decisions about it is important.
Very good, Crystal. Very good. You were getting good information. I couldn't have done this without you, because you've known about this for a long time. I didn't come into the game until late. I forget, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago when I started getting involved with the family reunion and supporting and creating the website for the Combs family reunion. And then really having to come face to face with your dad. My mother always talked about her Kenneth. She loved that Kenneth. And so then I got to meet your dad and then learned about his legacy and everything that he meant to his family. I thought it was so important. And so I've gotten into it and involved, but you're the one who really knows. You hold the key to all of this. So I hope you can come back on some of the other shows and be part of this. One thing I want to talk about is debanking your money. Now, debanking has become an increasingly popular talking point for Republicans in recent weeks as they take aim at the Biden-era regulations, who they accuse of conservatives and firms out of their financial system. This is talking about closure of bank accounts that financial institutions consider risky, often with a little notice of explanation. Now, a bank account could be considered risky because I don't keep much money in it, So maybe they might decide one day they're going to just close my account. What can I do? I don't have a lot of resources. What can people do? You have to make sure your financial institution is correct. And I'm not telling folks to put money under mattresses, but keep some cash on hand in case your bank does get closed. Back in the day, you know what folks used to do? They put their money under their mattress. They thought that was safekeeping, and maybe it was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I read something today, and I definitely think I need to look into it more. And you're raising that topic, so I know that's my prompt to look into it a little bit more. But I read that we should have 2 months stashed away because we don't know what could happen. It makes me think about that blackout that we had a couple years ago and how folks couldn't go to the bank and all of that. Yeah. I think we need to be prepared, and I think that we're getting enough signals to let us know this is something that we need to do. We don't know, we're so dependent on. My husband asked me the other day, and this is not related to banking, but how many numbers do you know by heart? I don't even know if I know my banking number quite by heart if I couldn't get to the ATM, so people don't have paper checks. Can't get on the internet. What's your banking account number? So I'm gonna start writing things down a little bit more. Keep a journal. Know where your stuff is. And definitely keep some cash on hand. Something to trade in case something goes down here.
We don't know, and that's why I bring this up, because a lot of people are unaware. They're thinking things are happening to them. So you got to be aware that what could happen. Don't get caught off guard. we know what we did when we went through COVID. It was very, very. That's my cousin Kenneth Combs. That's your dad, Kenneth Combs. Such a great keeper of the family legacy. Really appreciate him and what he did for our family. Because without him, we wouldn't be sitting here able to talk about this. I call it historical because it is. No one's done this before. People say, well, you put your family business out there. Well, it is business, it is family, and we all know who we are, or we don't know who we are, but we need to know. And so we haven't told anything that's not been published before. So it's important. And thank you, Cousin Kenneth in heaven, looking down and saying, look at my daughter, Crystal. Look what she's doing today.
Thank you, Edna.
So
thank
much.
you. I appreciate it.
So
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And to come in the weeks to come, we're going to be talking about more family history. We have other people that are part of our family legacy, the Hoggs. There are Hogg family members that are still living, and some have recently died. We're going to talk about them. We're going to talk about the Rose family. The Rose families are still living. They're part of our family. Hagens, and there's the Huggins part of the family too. And then there is the Olinger family. We're going to talk more about them. And some of them I know and just met coming into, moving back to Dayton, Ohio. I met a cousin and we started talking and she said, well, how do you know Janetta? She found out I knew Janetta. I said, well, Janetta's my first cousin. Our mom's her sister. She said, well, I said, well, how do you know Janetta? I said, she's my cousin. She said, well, I know Janetta because when my cousin, she said, cousin or aunt? She said, well, cousin Virgie. I said, Aunt Virgie? She said, yeah. I said, well, Aunt Virgie is my grandmother's sister. She said, what? So I said, you are Olinger? Yep. I'm not going to mention her name today, but I'll do it next week. But I said, I know them from way back. I know Aunt Virgie, She said, well, they just brought us up to Dayton when we moved from Kentucky to Dayton. She said, I don't know who she was in my family. So it's amazing we find it out. And then one of my sisters are best friends with her sister. So you never know.
No, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't. And you know what? We're better off when we know, because like my dad said, family, that's all we got.
So let's keep pushing forward and building each other up and leaving a legacy that really lasts and lasts longer than what we think. We just never know.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Crystal. Anything else you want to bring up or say before we go?
No. Thank you, Edna. Thank you again.
And thank you all for joining us. And don't forget to register for the Combs Family Historical Legacy Show. We have 3 more shows to go. You can give me a call on my number 512-902-7168. Email me at ednaparrish7@aol.com or ednaparrish7@gmail. And then hit us up on Facebook, Edna Howell-Parrish on Facebook, or go to the Combs Family website, and you can learn more about what we're doing as well. So thank you, Crystal, for joining us, and thank you all for being here with us as well.
Thanks for tuning in to Straight Talk Live with renowned radio pioneer Edna Howell-Parrish, the program dedicated to presenting thought-provoking issues and opinions with the goal of challenging listeners to re-examine their assumptions and expand their opinions and give thought to new ideas and concepts to better their lives and the lives of others. Join us next week for another opportunity to participate in making the world better. So until next week, live your best life from your friends at Straight Talk Live and host Edna Howell-Parrish.